Yes.
Yeah. All right, just for everybody who's been here for the first time, I record the class, the presentation here, and then I post them, huh?
Disclaimer. Yeah.
Disclaimer, thank you, yeah. So just to let you know, so don't talk about things you don't want to hear on the interwebs.
Tens of thousands of views on YouTube too. So
That's the thing, I noticed that, so we'll, tens of tens, yeah.
tens of one.
So we picked up, so here's the thing, I was wondering if maybe we could do the last three chapters, 28, 29, and 30 tonight. Now if we can't, I talked to Father and asked him, now, I don't know if you guys feel like meeting next week. I know it's between the Christmas and New Year's. So Father's going to be out of town, so I told him no. So we could either try to power through tonight and see if we can do all three chapters. If not, then we can come back after New Year's. What's that, second, third? Would that be the third or the fourth? Third, I think it is. Anyways, come back for one more class and finish up. So what do you guys think? You guys want to try to sprint here, or you want to see how far we can get and plan on doing one more class? Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, we don't sidetrack.
Okay, we'll keep Deacon Mike on track here. All right, so chapter 28. What's chapter 28? Prayer. Now, we notice that Ezra, and for Dave's benefit, now we'll do a little bit of recap here since he asked me.
That was a joke.
Oh, that was a joke? Oh, I had nothing else to talk about then. But as we notice that here, we're building on each one of these steps of the ladder, right? So now we've gone through all these different things, and he breaks down the chapters as part one, which was steps 1, 2, 3, which is the break with the world, okay? And that was essentially renunciation, detachment, and exile, and that was the purpose of what? Breaking from the world, right? That's where we need to start out on the ladder of divine ascent. Part 2 was the fundamental virtues. Obedience, repentance, remembrance of death. We talked about that. That seems to be an ongoing thing. Mourning, and meekness and loss of anger. Then we went into part 3, the spiritual passions, which are steps 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Remembrance of wrongs, malice, slander, talkativeness and silence, falsehood, and despondency and tedium. We went into part 4, which was the physical passions, steps 14, 15, 16, and 17. Gluttony, lust and chastity, avarice and poverty. Then part 5, the spiritual passions, continued. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23, insensitivity / lack of awareness. Sleep, prayer, and church. That's interesting, we're going to be talking about prayer again. Step 20 was alertness, 21, fear, 22, vainglory, 23, pride. Then we came into part 4, the higher virtues. So we could see, so this is, I'm sorry, for the benefit of the people who haven't been here through the whole class, we're doing the 30 steps to heaven. And this is the ladder of divine ascent by St. John Climacus. And what it is figuratively a ladder that everyone is climbing to get higher up and closer to heaven. And that's how he's broken this down. So really it was instructions by a monk, St. John Climacus, for other monks in how they can go ahead and acquire as much as possible holiness. And that's how he's describing here. So then we're on to part 6, which is the higher virtues, which is meekness, simplicity, humility, and discernment. Then finally, part 7, union with God. So we did stillness last week. Now we're going to talk about prayer and dispassion, and then the final step is faith, hope, and love. So let's talk about prayer. So I'm on page 218 of the text. And this is St. John Climacus. Prayer is by nature a dialogue and a union of man with God. All right? So focus on that, a dialogue and a union. Its effect is to hold the world together. It achieves a reconciliation with God. It is an extension of sin, expiation of sin, not extension, expiation of sin, a bridge across temptation, a bulwark against affliction. Prayer is future gladness, action without end, wellspringing of virtues, source of grace, hidden progress, food for the soul, enlightenment of the mind, and acts against despair, hope demonstrated, sorrow done away with. And I kind of underlined here that prayer is future. Now, something too, when he starts out talking about prayer, he says that prayer is dialogue and union of man with God. Now, what is he talking about there? Think about our normal prayer. At least for me, I'll think about mine. How does a prayer normally go? Do we follow the model of prayer, the Our Father, in our prayers? Sometimes, but a lot of times, and I'm talking for me. I know everybody else doesn't matter, but for me, when I get in there, a lot of times I got to think about all the things that I need to tell God. Right, the little talk with Jesus type of thing. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to tell God all the things I need. I'm going to tell God all the things that He needs to do for me. Right? Then when I'm done, what do I do? Amen. Off I go. In the confidence that God has heard everything I've asked for, and He's right on it right away, right? Right. But here we see, and this is something that we miss a lot in our prayer life, is that prayer is by nature a dialogue, a union of man with God. Now, when we talk about the word prayer, maybe that's a good place to start. What does prayer mean? What does prayer mean? The word prayer, it's actually an English word. I mean, a translation of English word. What does that mean? Maybe if you've read Shakespeare, you probably hear that term a lot. I pray thee, or I pray, I pray. It means it's like a fervent, what's that?
It's a plead.
A plead, yeah, it's a plead. It's like a petition, it's a plead. Almost like a beg. It's a very fervent asking of something. And so it's kind of fallen out of our everyday language because we say, well, if I come by and I say, pray you sit down. You go, well, yes, sir. But it's like, well, it's like, what's he doing? Playing Shakespeare or something like that? It's fallen out of use.
Thou art very handsome.
Thank thee.
He is welcome.
He is welcome. So it's something that's not in our normal language when we say the word pray, and it's kind of fallen out probably after the 19th century. But really, pray has always been just that, just a petition. It's nothing that it was always necessarily restricted only to God. Now, when you do pray and you do ask for someone to do something, a lot of times in our normal conversations, because we want something done. But as we look at this with this dialogue with God, with this union of man with God, if we talk about it as a dialogue, what does that mean? What does that imply? What are we talking about? What is a dialogue?
It's a conversation.
Conversation. What's that?
Conversation.
Two-way.
Two-way, yeah. It's two-way, right? So, in light of that, how often is our prayer two-way? All right? I mean, again, here's confession. Yeah, for me, a lot of times, it's not. Like I say, it's like, God, this is what I need. Because, we only go to God when we need something. Why bother Him when everything is good? But that's not the point. The point of this whole prayer thing is that we want to have that dialogue with God, right? When things are going good, when things are going bad, when we need something, when we want to say thanks. And if we look at the model prayer that Christ gave us, which we said just before we eat, which is usually when you say it before you eat, but really in our liturgical services and even tonight, we say it during all of our services. That is the model prayer. And if we look at that from the breakdown of how it goes, it's very simple. Our Father who art in heaven, it's that acknowledgement of who He is, where He is, right? Because of the point that He is in heaven, He is holy. Hallowed be Thy name. Holy is your name, right? Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done. So that is the future part of our prayer. Thy kingdom come. It hasn't come yet, but it will. Thy will be done. Now that's kind of a little bit interesting. Do we live that part of the prayer? Do we live Thy will be done? Or do we live my will be done? So when we say Thy will be done, what that is it's turning over that part of our life, that part of our existence to God and giving it up to Him for His own will, for His purposes, not for our own. Kind of tough. Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, acknowledging that He's the God of both earth and heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Now, we think about that, and I think that's why it comes in a relationship with meals when we think about our food. But really, if we look at that word, we'll say like consubstantial or homoousios. So it's something that is very substantial, something that is what's absolutely needed. Okay, it's not give us all the good stuff. It's give us what we need. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our sins or our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Now, where does that come from? Remember that in the New Testament, in the Gospels? What are we taught? At what level are we forgiven?
Where does the word forgive come from?
No. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. At what measure are we forgiven? What's the Bible say?
By that which we forgive others.
Okay, so by the same measure, that's essentially what that does is that sets the bar pretty high, right? You don't go around and say, well, and we talked about that with forgiveness and remembrance of sins. We don't turn around and say, well, that person I'll forgive, that person I won't. I'll forgive them a little bit, or I'll only forgive them when they ask, right? We don't forgive people unless they ask us, so we'll only do that. So then we turn around and we say, well, if that's the level that we're forgiving others, how is God, or how can we expect God to forgive us? And that's the whole reason for it. So it brings us back into that attention that our forgiveness that we expect to receive is on the same level that we need to give. So forgive us as we forgive those who trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil or the evil one, is usually how it's written. Okay? So lead us not into temptation. I mean, it's not that God necessarily leads us into temptation, but what we're asking him is to help keep us from those temptations that we may encounter, that we're going to encounter every day. But deliver us from evil or from the evil one. All right? And that's, I mean, we can say that's the devil, but really that's all the things that are going on in the world. So what we're praying for is God's protection against all of this stuff that we live every day. Now, given that as the prayer, and if we look at the word here as dialogue and union with God, what does that say about our prayer life? At what level does it have to be? Pretty good, pretty strong, right? So,
We have to listen.
there you go. We have to listen. So, getting back to my example I was saying, so as we're praying, how much time do we actually spend listening? We give God our list of needs, right? Nothing wrong with that. Hopefully we give him the praise and everything like that, but how much time do we actually spend sitting back for a few minutes and maybe reflecting on what we said, maybe waiting for that answer that we expect? Yes, we expect from God to answer our prayers. Now it may be yes, no, or wait. I don't know what the answer is going to be. That's up to him. But if we're busy talking to God and not busy listening to God, then that's when our prayer life tends to get a little shallow, right? We used to say we don't feel our prayers are going beyond the ceiling type of thing. I pray and I pray and I pray and nothing happens. I don't feel any better about it, and God doesn't listen. Well, have you ever listened to what he had to say? So that's something to consider.
Deacon, I
Yes,
was
ma'am.
always under the understanding, though, that you don't ask God for anything because he already knows what you need.
Well, so we do ask God for forgiveness. We ask God through the whole service. We ask for petitions, right?
That's not what I meant. I meant about, like you said,
personal things.
things are like.
And God
help.
knows before you're right. God knows even before you ask. But there's nothing wrong with asking God for things as well. I mean, things that we need. And I'm not talking about the prosperity theology and all this other stuff. I mean, we need to ask for God for the things we need, which brings up a good point. What is it that we need? What is it that we need? Sorry?
Mercy.
Mercy. Bunches of that.
We need strength.
We need strength. Forgiveness. Healing. Yeah, exactly. Do we need the new car? Oh, Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz or whatever? Probably not. God knows we need a car, and he'll provide that. But look at the things that God is better at providing that maybe we are providing for ourselves, or our jobs are better at providing for us, right?
Guidance.
Exactly, guidance. But how are you going to get that guidance unless you don't listen? Yeah, see? Exactly. And those are the kind of things that we need to be asking God for. And again, there's nothing wrong with asking God for material needs, but you're right. God does know those things and he understands those. Take a look at the prayers that we say during the liturgy. Where are those prayers focused? I mean, none of them are for a new building or for a new parking lot or something like that. All of those prayers are focused on the mercy, the love, the guidance, and all those other things that we need from God. Salvation, exactly. All those things. That's the kind of stuff that we need to ask for. And again, we need to take some time to listen. And we talk about here, he does a nice job here, and I think we already discussed that, down on page 219, 220. He takes the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, breaks it down. He does a very good job at that, and I think we covered that pretty well. Over on page 220, it says, St. John the Latter provides us with a similar structure for prayer. He says, heartfelt prayer, and I'm in the middle of 220 here, should have first place in our book of prayer. Next should be confession and genuine contrition of the soul. After that should come our request to the universal King. This method of prayer is the best. So he really broke it down into three. I got three things here when I looked at this, and really it's kind of in the same sense as the model prayer here, the Our Father. He says, heartfelt thanksgiving should be the first place in our book, right? Giving thanks to God for everything that we have. Next should be a confession and genuine contrition of the soul, right? Forgive me for all these sins that I've committed. Then third, he says, after that should come request to the universal King. Now, the request that we should be asking for, again, is the mercy, the guidance, the love, the patience, the salvation, all those other things that God provides for us that we can get from him, not necessarily that we can get from other people. So page 221. In this book, the author kind of breaks it down. He talks about prayer as being stages as opposed to level, because what he wants to say is that when we look at it level, a lot of times people think, well, one prayer is more important than another, whether it's spoken or mental or prayer of the heart. But he says, no, not necessarily. And sometimes for different times and different reasons, you have to have different prayers. So taking a look up here on 221, he says, one of the greatest teachers of prayer, St. Theophan the Recluse, refers to three stages or level of prayers. The first is the spoken prayer. We all know what that is. The second is the mental prayer, and the third is the prayer of the heart. These are often referred to as levels or stages. The author says, I prefer to refer to them as forms of prayer. The reason is that though each one is higher than the last, even the lowest form of prayer never disappears from the spiritual life of even the most advanced practitioner of prayer. Let us then examine these three different forms of prayer. So he talks about spoken prayer. So when we teach our children to pray, right? What do? We say, okay, I want you to take this prayer rope and go in that corner and learn to pray, right? That's what we do with the little kids. And how long is that going to last? Yeah, anybody who's had kids or taught kids knows it's not a very long prayer session. So we teach them first to say the prayers, right? To say the prayers at the church. And then, as they grow older, or wiser certainly in the church, then we teach them how to mentalize, the mental part of the prayers. What does this really mean? How can we think about these prayers? So if you do need to pray, whether you're in public or in school, you say, well, I have to stop, I have to, cross myself, face east, and then start reciting these prayers. Well, no. How about if you can kind of start praying mentally as you go along? Then the third level is the prayer of the heart. And this is the one that is definitely the most challenging. And so it's something, it's abstract, but it's something also that can be accomplished. And that is part of the training that goes into the monastic life, as the prayer of the heart. So if we start out on 221 and talk about the spoken prayer, he says we begin to learn how to pray through the church, through its prayers, hymns, services. Since the earliest days of the church, the Psalms have been the backbone of the Orthodox prayers and worship. Now, we do a lot of Psalms, certainly in the Orthodox Church, don't we? I mean, you heard one today, the Psalm 50, several other Psalms, all through the Vesper service is all Psalms. The hours are all Psalms, right? So if you ever say, boy, I wish I knew something to pray about or pray for or something, the first thing to do is take your Bible. Usually if you go about the middle of it and do this, you're going to hit the Psalms. And the Psalms are the prayers of the church. They always have been the prayers of the church. In some areas they're kind of neglected, but still they are the prayers of the church. This is what the early church prays. This is what that's what the book of the Psalms is about. Psalms means hymns and praises. Actually, literally means praises. So when the Jewish people would praise God, and if you take a look at it, that's the format that most of them take, is that they're in the forms of praises to God for different things, for different things that he's done, right? So we start out with a spoken prayer. And again, we need to remember that the prayer is a dialogue. So as we take the time in our prayer corner hopefully every morning and every evening, as often as you can, and you pray, take some time to listen as well and to reflect on that prayer and see where it's going. See what God is guiding you in. Also, he talks about here on page 222, there's a prayer book. In your liturgy books, okay, in the back, there is the prayers of Thanksgiving, okay? They're not here right now, but I know Brian and I don't know if David has helped out. I know John and Tatiana Terrell. That's essentially what they're reading, are those prayers that are in the back of your liturgy book. So the prayers that are there are the prayers that you can say right after communion. So I know there's a lot going on, a lot of things going back and forth, but take a few minutes. There's a lot of them in there, but they're beautiful prayers, and those are prayers of the church that are in the prayer book. There's also other prayer books back there. There's the Jordanville that does have a lot of different prayers in it as well. Very helpful. So when you don't know what to pray, or you feel that you need some help, and you've tried the Psalms, or maybe you want to try some other prayers that are specific for different directions, go ahead and take a look in the back of your liturgy book. I know a lot of people maybe never even really knew they were there. Then he talks about the second stage. He's running into the mental prayer. Now, the mental prayer, this is something I think, and if you look at it as far as levels too, you're looking at it as almost levels of difficulty, all right? So as we're praying out loud, at least for me, you're hearing the words, you may be reading them, or if you have them memorized, you're able to say them out loud and focus on those words, right? So there's the noise. You can hear what's going on. Now the second level is the mental prayer, and that's a little bit harder as we're getting up into that. Because where are you hearing the prayers now? We're talking about the mental prayer. In your mind. But in your mind. So sometimes maybe if you're at work, or if you're wandering down the street, driving in, or something like that, there's your opportunity to do mental prayers. Now what's one of the problems with the mental prayers? Distracting, yeah. Why? Because as you're sitting there thinking about your prayers and you're focusing and concentrating, next thing you know, now there's something else, something more important that you need to think about than the prayers that you were originally focused on. And certainly if you're driving your car or something like that, or walking down the street, that might be a little difficult if you are focusing on something else. If you, like me, and you can't chew gum and walk, it's not something that you want to try. What's that?
There are many prayers said in our schools and universities right before final exams.
Exactly,
In
yeah.
your head.
And as they're doing it, like, why did I study harder, God? and that does help you focus. But yeah, so the next form is mental prayer. Now, again, getting back to the analogy of the baby, if you take that child and say, okay, now sit in the corner and think of a prayer in your head, and sit there and think of a prayer in your head, I think that'd be a little bit difficult. They need to learn how to say the prayers. They need to understand those prayers before they can, I guess, mentalize them, for lack of a better word. Take them and compartmentalize them. And once they're in there, once they're in your mental area, once they're memorized, you can go ahead and pull those out at any time, right? So it is helpful as you're opening your Bible in the middle and starting to go through your Psalms. Maybe take a few minutes to try to memorize some of them. All right, we say a lot of them during Vespers, during the liturgy. So it might be nice to just see if you can say them quietly along as you hear the reader reciting them, because it's a good way to memorize them. And by writing God's word on your heart, you can take it anywhere you want to go, even in the dark. When we're standing up there in the dark, you can recite your prayers without having to be able to read it. So the next level he's talking about is the mental prayer. Now it goes on, page 228. The second form is the mental prayer, or the prayer of the mind. This is when the prayer goes from being something we do only at certain times of the day to some things we do inwardly throughout the day. Although it is thought of as the next level of prayer, it is something that even beginners can do. We can pray to God silently in our own words in almost any situation, but it takes time and experience in prayer to be able to learn the prayers of the church by heart. So again, it's a matter of being able to use them quietly and hear them in your mind. And it says, he's on the middle of 229 here, Prayer of the mind should not replace the prayer of the lips. So what he's saying here, again, I'm glad he calls it different forms of prayer, is that you don't graduate and go from reciting prayers to doing them mentally because you're more advanced or something like that. And so on page 229, one of the prayers that is frequently encouraged in practice of mental prayer is the Jesus prayer. As we have said already, it is an invocation that can be easily repeated in any situation. It's therefore ideal for continuous prayer throughout the day. As St. Paul says, pray without ceasing. Now, this is something that is learned in the monasteries, but it's something that we can do as well, is the Jesus prayer. Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, the sinner, right? And there's different forms of that. For some people, it's just, Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Some people, it's just Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. Take your prayer rope, if you have a prayer rope, and that helps you as you're focusing. So this is a way to develop the mental prayer. So, yeah, something like that. So, I ride a van pool in the morning. So I got like an hour plus of riding into Detroit. And that's what I do. And, sometimes I fall asleep and I wake up and my prayer rope's on the, but, that's...
You're not driving, are you?
Yes, of course. I need
You're not driving the van.
Yes, of course.
And sleeping.
No,
And
of course
sleeping.
not. Yeah, and sleeping, yeah.
Jesus would take it.
That's right. Jesus is my co-pilot. So it's opportunities to do it at that time. Maybe as you are able to, as you advance and develop prayer time, maybe try taking that in the evenings before you go to bed. And say, I'm just going to set aside, I'm going to do, I don't know, is that like a 33:50 now?
Yeah, 33.
30, yeah, so say, I'm going to do, say 3 laps or something like that. Just do 3 laps and see how that works out. And then sometimes you can develop that and do more. I like to walk around at work and I'll just have it on there and I'll just, focus on that as I'm walking. Again, it's finding the time. I shouldn't say finding the time, it's setting aside the time. We all have the same amount of time, it's just how we use it. And that's what we need to determine.
For me, it's not so much an issue of time, it's an issue of stillness.
Right.
Like, I'm still and I'm trying to get my head together to do this, and then the next thing you know,
Something else.
because the way things are in our life now, the information coming at you, all the stimuli, it's hard to just shut it all off.
Right.
And be still. That's for me is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, and I agree. That's a huge challenge for me too, because as I'm sitting there and setting that time aside, and as I'm praying, unfortunately, I start getting all these things hey, don't you have something, you got to do this, you got to do that. And the idea, it's hard to shut off.
Maybe I do need Adderall. That kind of stuff.
I don't know. But I think it's something that's something that you have to fight for. You have to fight for that time of stillness. You have to fight for that time of prayer. It doesn't come naturally.
Father Paul said go into a dark closet, and that way nobody's going to interrupt you. Just, get away from it.
Right.
Here in your home, there's always so many things you want to do, this, and that, and, so.
Or, your closet could be a closet, could be a study.
Whatever,
But how about just going in the garage, sitting in the car?
Yeah, that's true.
Close the door, just sit there. And again, it's not like you're going to sit there for hours or something like that, but just take some time. No radio, no television, no music, no noise, right? Just quiet. Just you and yourself and God. And sometimes that's the scariest place to be, right? To be there by yourself. Because then you start, thinking about all these different things. So, but that's true. You do have to fight for it. That's something, all of us have 24 hours in the day. That's all the time we have. That hasn't changed. It's how you use that time, how you divide it up. You can't make time, you can't steal time, you can't find time or whatever. That's it, you got it. Now what are you going to do with it? How are you going to divide that up? And generally that's divided up by what's important. We make sleep, well some of us do, a lot of us don't make enough time for sleep. That's not important. That's usually the thing that tends to go as well. But we're going to eat, we're going to go to work. That's important. Of course, we got to work. But that's important to us because we've set that time aside and made it important to go in there and during that time frame, as much as possible, focus on work, whatever that is, right? Maybe it's going to be time with our kids, our grandkids, or family members. We say, when my family is here, I'm going to be here. I'm not going to be on my phone. I'm not going to be watching TV. You know, my kids come over, the football game's on, now turn it off. I'm going to be there and present in the moment. And I think that's something that we have lost a lot, is to be in the moment, right here, right now.
I just said to myself the other day, thank God when I was a mother with babies, toddlers, there wasn't the cell phone, that I could be pushing the car and on the phone, because that was our time to say, oh, look at that, you know, point things out, chit chat with them. And I was scared, like what if I would have been on that cell phone if it was available in those years? I would have missed out on all that time, and that would have been even more for me to cry about now. Everything else that I
You can never have enough to feel
Always
guilty
the
about.
optimist, Rebecca.
But no, it's a good point, and it is sad when I see that. I see, you know,
Wonderful in every situation.
Yes.
oh,
Grocery
yes,
store, driving.
Yeah.
It's a family of four, and the mom and the dad are on the phone, and the
They're
kids
probably
are...
talking to each other.
It's like, aren't you paying
Exactly.
attention to your kids are in the parking lot?
well,
But this is a personal choice. It's a
bad
personal
choice.
choice.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
The phone does not, okay, you know me guys. I do not have a TV for the last 5 years. I do not have it. So I had to go to work, I was at lunch, and I seen that the Russian minister was. But what I'm saying, it's your choice. I'm not saying that I'm better or no, whatever pious I am. No, but I'm saying it's your choice. And I have the choice. I had some colleagues over and they want to play karaoke. And I don't care for karaoke. Then they want to play cards, and I don't care for cards. So they said, I bring the TV, I bring the station, and I said, oh, I have no room. Anyway, it was my choice, and trust me, it's so hard sometimes not to turn on the TV or the, but it's your choice. This is what I'm saying.
Free will.
It's like when you drive, I'm sorry.
No, what?
When you drive, for everybody who I hear, everybody drives stupid. Look how stupid people are. I'm one of the drivers. So, but there will be not one person who I hear that it's everybody else. So it's really, it's you.
well, sure, it's
My opinion, I'm sorry. Again, because I don't have TV doesn't mean that I'm...
but yeah, but see that.
I spend money on something else, but...
I think the phones, like Rebecca said,
The phone is
the big problem right now.
Yep.
You see families, mom, dad, and the kids
Oh.
sitting at a table at a restaurant, and they're
Yeah.
all looking at
At
their
a
phones.
restaurant, you see it a lot.
It's shame.
It is.
Yeah, and it's the loss of that moment. It's the loss of that opportunity. Yes, Catherine.
So like it makes me like really upset when I see people distracted driving, especially like when they're texting. And so this one time I wrote stop texting on a napkin and I would like hold it up to the window and there was a person texting next to me. They didn't look up from their phone to see it, but it was worth a try.
You could try it. Yeah, you should have texted him. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, it's a matter of being in the moment with the people that are there, and it's the same thing with being in the moment and being with God, right? Don't be the past. Future ain't here yet. Past is done and gone. All you have is right now. So what are you going to do with right now?
So do you think it's harder now for all the reasons we talked about in our modern society? It's getting harder and harder to achieve that because we're almost like we're conditioned. I mean, really, in condition means that you don't have a choice, kind of. You just submit to it. But it's the world we live in. It's like you can't really function in many ways in society, whether through work or school or whatever, without being plugged in. To
Sure, and there are more opportunities, but like think about that when you're growing up.
Discipline now.
That's the thing, it does. But I mean, when you're growing up, what was the big thing? Was television. I mean, we only had like 4 stations, but still, it was television, right?
But you didn't take
And-
it with you. That's
No, you didn't. But that wasn't the
It's
point.
right there.
That was
I mean,
distraction. And what was distraction before that? Radio or something like that. What was it before that? What was it before that?
With the television, TV dinners. So
That's
you
right.
sit
So you didn't.
and
Yeah,
get
forgot about
water.
that. Yeah, you could sit there eating TV dinners on your TV tray. I forgot about that. They were great. Yeah. Banquet chicken.
So really, you could say that technology is a device of Satan to draw us in.
Exactly. No, but no, it doesn't. But I mean, the point is that there's always been distractions.
Sure.
There's always been distractions. I'm sure if you go to an Amish community or something like that, who have, or even in a monastery, there you go. Do they have distractions? And we were talking about that in here. Do they have perfect lives?
No.
They have all kinds. No, they don't. They have all kinds of distractions.
When somebody come with the books out and with the airline in the
Yeah, that could be distracting. But I mean, just, yeah.
So let's not go phone distraction.
I never thought of it that way, Angela. I like the way you put that.
I can tell you the name of the monastery.
Yeah, in case you want to visit, right, and see these sins.
Well, it's better than the monastery where the guy would beat the poor monk in the novice, right? In last week's class.
Yeah, last week's class. Yeah, kick the poor mouth. Yeah, but I mean, so again, there's always those distractions, but we have to fight for that time, and we have to decide how we're going to do it, how we're going to divide it. Now, the very last one is the prayer of the heart, and on 229 he says, the highest level of prayer is the prayer of the heart. This is when the prayer is not only something we do, but something that we are. All right, so it's going from an action. It's going from from talking, from being able to hearing it, to be able to hear it into our minds, but now to be able to live this. He says, this is when prayer is not only something we do, something we are. When the Holy Spirit Himself prays within us. Perhaps this is what St. Paul meant when he said, "We do not know what we should pray for as we ought, but the Holy Spirit Himself makes intercessions for us with groanings that cannot be uttered." And then also he writes down here, it says, "It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." As with the prayer of the mind, so too with the prayer of the heart, the Jesus prayer has enjoyed special attention as a method of requiring this elevated state of being. And if you talk to monastics or people who have been more advanced in this kind of prayer, there's a real good video that was out about the Jesus prayer, which was very interesting because they were interviewing monastics and they were asking them, you talk about prayer without ceasing, but I don't see you praying. And they'll say, well, yeah, but I am still praying in my heart. That prayer is constantly going on. Now think about all the habits that you might have, good, bad, or indifferent, whether chewing your nails or something like that. A lot of times those bad habits might even be to the point where, I don't know, you don't even think about it, right? You just do it automatically, whatever that is. Wouldn't it be nice if that habit, that automatic habit that you have, would be something like being able to constantly recite the Jesus prayer in your mind and have it in your heart, to become the prayer. Now, when we talk about becoming the prayer, what does that mean exactly? How is that changing you?
You're not you.
You're not you. What are you?
You're giving you to the
Okay.
world
Right.
in the name
Right.
of Christ.
Right.
And I can only speak to that as a teacher, how many times, without even, quote, practicing, I would know that it was a really difficult day for the students, or there was exams or whatever, and I just felt myself, be still.
Right.
It's okay, we're going to get through this. I wasn't talking about me. It was something else talking to the students.
It was that still, quiet voice, and that is where we find God. Remember with Elijah, I love that. What happened when he was running from the priests, the prophets of Baal? They all got slaughtered up there on Mount Carmel. What happened? Where did he go? He went up the mountain, right, by himself, looking for God, asking God, "Where are you, God?" And God wasn't in the storm. He wasn't in the tornado. Where was God? In the still, quiet voice. And that is the place that we find God, even in our lives. Not just Elijah. Is when we find that peace with God in that still, quiet voice. That is part of the Jesus prayer as well. That still, quiet voice. we become that prayer by the constant reciting of it. Just like if you're an athlete or something like that, the more you practice, the better you become. And you can see like Michael Phelps or something like that. When you see him, you can say, "Oh, geez, he's shaped like this." And, yeah, he looks like a swimmer. He looks like an athlete, right? Because of all those years of practice. And it's the same thing with us as human beings, monastics, the saints, all of them. They become the prayer because of that constant exercise, that constant training. And one of the ways of doing that is through the Jesus prayer. So let's see. 2:30, I underlined just some things here I thought were interesting. It is foolishness to expect to achieve pure prayer without ascetic struggle and virtue, without being purified of sin and mastering the passions. And it is equally foolish to think that prayer of the heart is a substitute for common worship. So as we're building up these different virtues, and we'll talk about dispassions in a minute, as we're building those up, this is how we're able to live that purity of prayer. So the thing is we can't live a terrible sinful life and then say, okay, now I'm going to say the Jesus prayer and I'll be right there, everything will be right. Also to turn around and say, well, I'm not going to go to church because I am now spiritually higher than all those other people in church. I don't need it, it's not doing anything for me. We need to keep in, that's all part of the training, that's all part of building that spiritual muscle that we need to build. Includes the sacraments, includes living the life of the church, includes our own personal prayer. All those things are part of it. So, as we're praying, here we're now coming up to step 29, talking about dispassion. So one of the things that the prayer does, as we spend our time in prayer, however you want to call it, meditation or something like that, but as we're spending our time in focused prayer, hopefully we're spending a lot less time in focused sin, right? Hopefully we're spending a lot less time in sinful thoughts and sinful pursuits. So dispassion. What is dispassion, first of all? It's kind of a funny word. What's passion?
Not to be controlled by passions.
Okay, but what are passions?
Which is very much.
Okay, the opposite of virtues. Yeah?
Drinking, smoking, eating, loving to yap, or, to put down somebody, not to help somebody, not to be kind.
Right.
Things that take you away from God.
Okay, yeah, things that take you away from God, doing that which is bad. The passions are, how did Father Paul put it? When you think about every virtue, there's a passion that's kind of like the flip side of that virtue when we think about it from that standpoint. And to be dispassionate doesn't mean to be unfeeling. It doesn't mean to be standoffish or anything like that. What that means is to be able to reach that level of holiness, I guess, to be able to not even be affected by those passions when they're presented or when the opportunity presents itself, all right? Such things as, and again, I mean, I don't want to go back through the whole book, but as we're looking at the passions, part 3 talks about the spiritual passions, part 2 about the fundamental virtues, things like that, all the things that we should be. Talking about whether it's gossip, say, all right? Something very simple. At work, at school, wherever we happen to be, maybe we kind of get in a little conversation about so-and-so, about what they're doing. That's obviously
A passion. So you should
certainly not a virtue.
by that passion.
Right. So rather than ignoring that or walking away or saying, look, I don't want to talk about that person and withdrawing from it, and certainly not starting the conversation yourself, right? You participate in, and that's part of the passions that we're referring to. So I'm on page 232. And he kind of goes on here in this description, but St. John Climacus, but down in the second paragraph, it says the highest level of virtue is a state of dispassion. By dispassion, we do not mean the inability to experience passions, but a complete mastery over them. So, generally the best way to not become involved in the passions is to not get yourself in a position to be in those sort of situations, right? So whatever that might be, whether it's lying or stealing or something like that, don't put yourself in a position to do that. Now, what he's saying here is to be dispassionate is to have mastery over them, so that you will never, even if that situation does present itself, you will never find yourself hating your neighbor. You'll never find yourself wishing ill will on somebody. You'll never find yourself talking about somebody, right? Now that is the higher level that they're talking about here, and it's certainly pretty hard to achieve, right? I mean, certainly for me. I'm on page 233. Dispassion is a state of being in which all the passions have been transformed into virtues. Quoting St. John, the dispassionate soul is immersed in virtues as a passionate being is in pleasure. Right? Kind of an odd way of putting it. But what he's saying is that we find our pleasures not in the passions, but in the virtues that are the opposite of the passions. Let's see, going on. So, down on 232. For most of us, our passions, sins, and desires distort the virtues. Our good intentions are mingled with ulterior motives, and our perception of God's will is clouded by our desires. This is why we often confuse our own will with the will of God. Only the dispassionate, those precious few, are able to really know God's will because they're the ones who have achieved dispassion. The will of the Lord becomes a sort of inner voice. Through illumination, all human teaching is beneath him. So when we're able to put God first and say that I'm living for God, I'm not living for myself, then we're able to turn those passions into virtues and live as virtuous people. Now he talks here on page 234 about theosis. Now what is theosis? Theosis. What is theosis?
Means to attain the likeness of God.
Very good. What's another word for theosis?
To the Protestant church, they would use sanctification.
Sanctification, right. So sanctification. Because theosis, people hear that and they go, huh? It's sanctification. Now, as we think about this, so what is our whole purpose of this theosis sanctification, whether we know it or not? Where are we going with this? What's our objective?
Die to self.
What's that?
Die to self.
Die to self, for
So
what
more
reason?
of God can be brought to life in us.
Right, for what reason? What is our ultimate goal?
To be made like him.
Exactly, to be like God. Now, with some people, when we say something like that, I want to be like God, people say, no, you're not. You'll never be like God. You'll never be like God. Well, no, I want to have that union with God, because we're told that that's how we're taught. No, you never will be, because he's God. To be Christ-like, yeah. But you never will be, because that's Christ and he was God, and God is God, and you'll never be there. So all you're going to do is just kind of, I guess, thrash around or something like that, hope for the best, right? But what does the Orthodox Church teach about that? Is it possible to reach that union with God? It is possible, sure. Those are the saints. Those are the people we see on the iconostasis. Those people, men and women, are the ones who have been able to achieve in some way that dispassionate life in order to realize theosis, realize sanctification, and be united with God. Now, we talk about that. We say that that is the focus of the Christian life. But what do we do to practice that? How do we achieve that? If it's the objective of the Christian life, and we're all Christians and we're always going to church and stuff like that, does that mean all of us now have achieved theosis? No.
Process.
Okay.
Well, according to the ladder of divine ascent, even the Most High achievers and fell.
Right.
If they don't watch themselves.
Sure. Well, and so with that, it's not a one-time good deal, right? Yeah. It's not so much the race. It's not like reaching the top of the ladder, or I think of it like crossing the finish line. You know, you break the tape. Whew, that's done good. It's an inward struggle that lasts how long?
Lifetime.
A lifetime. Yeah. It's nothing that's gonna. The only finite time on that is your life here on earth, however long or short that might be. That's the time frame that we have in order to achieve this. And we achieve this by, among other things, as St. John's saying, all of these virtues, turning these passions into virtues, becoming dispassionate to the point where we don't even think about those kind of things. We don't even participate in them. Now, how hard is something like that?
We can't do it.
And we can't do it on our own, that's for sure.
We have to have the grace of the Holy Spirit Spirit.
Yep.
And He works it in us. It's a synergy.
There you go. Synergy. And what does that mean?
We're working with Him.
Exactly.
Like it says, we work out our salvation.
Exactly. So we talked about this in the teen class. So what is that? How does that work as far as the Calvinist view?
They don't believe that we have any part in it. They believe that in
What do they call that?
justification by grace. and faith.
Okay, right. But what do they call that? Something called. Right. Thank you. Yeah. So you are what you are.
Sorry, what was that? I didn't hear.
It's
Predestination.
predestination. Yeah. Predestination. So in the pure Calvinist sense, which probably now, if you ask most people who claim to be Calvinists or something like that, they probably say, well, we don't really believe in that. But the idea was that everybody was decided, somehow you were stamped and made at birth, you were going to be either saved or not. So regardless of what you did or how you did it, you were saved. Now, there are people who out there would never be saved. And you could say, well, this person here was, a minister in the church and did this, and this, so it sure seemed like he was on the path to salvation, but then he fell. Well, the reason is that he was never really saved in the first place. So that in the purest sense is that whole theory. So we don't believe in that. We believe that in this synergy, the synergia, where we work with God. God gives us the opportunity, but we have to take that opportunity. It's not a matter of sitting back and saying, okay, God, I believe in you, so now, work your stuff and make me perfect or make me sanctified, make me holy. Right? We have to do that work. And what are some of the works that we have to do?
The sacraments.
There you go.
Read the scriptures.
Right. Live a life of sacrament. Live a life of scripture. Live, as it says here, live the prayer. Be the prayer. Let that become part of you. And yeah, it's a lifetime effort, a lifetime journey, but that is our objective as Christians. That's where we want to go. And he talks about here on page 235, which is very important. So as we're talking to other people and they're kind of going, what are you talking about? You can't be God. It says, if no created being can become God, for he is beyond all being, how do we explain this contradiction? The Orthodox Church explained it as a distinction between God's essence, what he is by nature, and his energies, what we can experience of God by his grace and his condescension. God is by nature love, and by his grace we become love. By his nature holy, and by his grace we become holy. God is by nature eternal, and by his grace we have everlasting life. So that's the whole thing. That's how we share into that life of God, life of Christ. And yeah, on page 236 he explains this. The Theosis or Dispassion cannot be acquired with the intellect, but only by experience, meaning by synergy. We just discussed that at length. So, let's see, we're getting up to the end here. So we're talking about dispassion, and I'm on page 237. It talks about, finally, dispassionate love. If it is indeed true that God is love, then theosis or union to God is to acquire that perfect love. So, again, how do we do that? Through the virtues, through the dispassions, as he discusses in here. Finally, he says, to have dispassion is to have the fullness of love, by which I mean the complete indwelling of God, and those who through dispassion are pure in heart, for they shall see God. Right? So that is our objective. That is what we're talking about when we look at this life and say that we have to be dispassionate. Okay. Any questions on that? I know we've blasted through this in about the past hour-ish. Any questions? So we talked about prayer. We talked about dispassions. Okay. Do you guys want to see if we can do step 30, or do we want to hold off on that? I know there's a lot of people still waiting for confessions, or are we? Okay.
Yeah, if there's time. Yeah, but in answer to your question, I'm willing to stay.
Okay. and I'm sorry. Anytime you guys, I'm not trying to hold it.
Is that the last chapter?
This is the last chapter.
Yeah, might as well.
Might as well. Okay, good. Faith, love, and hope. So, 238, here we go. And now at last, after all that has been said, there remains that triad, faith, hope, and love. binding and securing the union of all. But the greatest of these is love. We heard that in 1 Corinthians, since it is the very name of God himself. To me, they appear as one ray, as one light, as one disk, and all is a single radiance and single splendor. He talks about these three virtues, faith, love, and hope, as the holy trinity of the spiritual life. Without the former virtues, love becomes a vague sentiment. But when we see all three as one virtue, we are able to better grasp what love means. So what does love mean? What is love?
God is love.
God is love, okay. But he says it just becomes a sentiment, a feeling. What is love?
Well, it takes more than feeling and sentiment.
Giving?
You have to act.
You have to act, okay. So now that changes love from being just a sentiment or a feeling to what, like a verb. I was thinking about it like an action word, right?
Right.
Because we could say, well, I love the whole world, and I can just kind of sit here and say, boy, look at all that love that guy has for the world. Or as St. James, when he talks about faith, right? Show me your faith by your deeds. Same thing with love. Show me your love by your deeds. Because if not, as he says, it just becomes a sentiment, right? It becomes a feeling that kind of comes and goes, right? And what happens when that love is gone? Then what? Right?
You have no hope.
You have no hope, yeah.
And that is why, to me, they are so tied together, that the greatest of these is love only if you have built a foundation of faith
Mm-hmm.
and can understand that hope is something you do not see.
Right.
It's beyond all.
Well,
And trust is there
sure.
so that you can love
Mhm.
without question.
So,
Whoever, I can walk into this room and feel love because I'm both receiving it and giving it.
right. And so when you talk about hope in those sense, what is hope then? Hope is for the future, right?
Or the future or the better, whatever that may be, right now.
But if you so let's kind of tie this together. So if we're looking at faith, what is faith? How do they define faith? Remember?
Believe.
Kind of, sort of.
In Hebrews, does it say faith is the evidence of things not seen?
Right? Unseen and the things hoped for. Right. So faith and hope definitely go together. Yeah, you can't have one without the other, right? Because think about what your faith would be if you didn't have hope, and certainly if you didn't have love to back that up, to live that faith. So the love causes us to live the faith, and without that faith, what is the hope? What is the hope? What are we hoping for? Something better? More love? More faith? I don't. Right? It's that hope, that belief that there is a future, really, and that's why it is so
That there is
sad.
love.
Sorry?
Hope that there is love.
Yeah, we could hope for love.
Because that futuristic concept,
Mhm.
particularly in this day and age of Star Wars, I'm not so sure I want it. But they hope that God will take care of. That which is unseen will always be there.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore I can love.
So what you're saying is that unless you had the hope, you couldn't love?
It would be pretty difficult.
Interesting.
That's
So
why. I mean, love is the force. It's the greatest of these.
Right.
It wraps itself in and around faith and hope.
Right. But what would you have to have first? The love or the hope? Or the hope for love? I guess.
I think you'd have to have the faith first to have
Okay.
it. That opens the door, and then love can blossom, and you can understand hope.
So if hope was hard or faith was hard, would that make love impossible?
Could be.
So then we're not loving unconditionally. We're loving on the condition that there's faith and hope. I'm not trying to put you.
No. Because once you get to love, it's unconditional, it's forever.
Right, so with that, we have to have that love, and that is part of the building. That is really what really all these virtues are all about. Now, as we look at that, as we're building up this love of our God, love of each other, right? That's how we show our love for God, is our love for each other. Then there is that faith, that action, right? That love in action is a demonstration of our faith. And then that also builds the hope. The hope that comes with faith, the hope of things to come. Now, on that example, someone say sitting in the city of Aleppo and the mess that they have over there. I don't know if, I've been hearing the reports. What a mess. How can you have hope that things are going to get better? How can you have hope, or even the faith of hope, that anything is going to get better?
What do we mean by better?
Well, better than what you have. Better than what you have. Better than being killed. Better than...
Yeah.
But I mean,
Those things are still going to happen. Those things are going to happen all the time. But love is still something that is conditional and beyond the time and the space that we are in. Christ, you could say, well, he had hope of the Father and stuff like that. Yeah, but at the time that he was hanging on the cross, that was pretty difficult, if we put it in human terms, certainly. And he was suffering in the human sense. To see the hope of the future as he was hanging on the cross and dying. Right? Why have you forsaken me? Right? But he still had love, even as he was hanging on the cross, to be able to say, forgive them, because they don't know what they do. Even to the thief, right? Because of his confession. We say that before each communion. So he has that love, and that love is that foundation, that building block. So even without the knowledge that the sun's going to come up tomorrow, even without the knowledge that people will be relieved from the suffering that they have in Aleppo, or even before you know that you'll be able to get out of this concentration camp, is it possible to still have love? If the hope is based only on being able to be relieved of your suffering, current situation, then that can change, and that makes the love conditional, is what I'm saying. So if we're saying, and I think about like the concentration camps, if you've ever been to, you go like Dachau or Auschwitz or something like that, and some of those tours, you just look at it, and these places are cleaned up now. But I mean, if you ever go in there and look around, it's like, how could people endure those kind of things?
but then you read the stories. And they are just soul-inspiring.
Sure, yes, absolutely. And most of the things that you see is that there's always that thread of love. Mm-hmm. There's always that thread of love. They say don't lose hope. Yeah, don't lose hope. But what is that hope? That hope is that love that you have for God, that you have for the other people that are there, that caring. When you see those little sparks of humanity, then you say, wow, there just might be a chance for us. You know? So, but yeah, that's what we're talking about here. So when we look at this, and faith, he talks about 239. Many people do not understand why faith is a virtue, for faith is usually understood as nothing more than believing in something that cannot be proven. But when we speak of faith as a Christian virtue, we are speaking of something more specific than this. It is not a virtue to believe, for example, that the so-and-so told me is true about the weather, or that it will be good tomorrow despite the gloomy forecast. Faith or belief does not mean gullibility. Unfortunately, many people think of religious faith in that way. But that kind of faith is far too rudimentary to deserve a place at the top of the ladder. Faith as the evidence of things not seen is the beginning of faith, but not its end. And he goes on to say on 240, faith, like hope and love, describes our relationship with God. The reason faith lies at the summit of the ladder is that it both shapes our relationship with Him, and at the same time, it is the fruit of that relationship. It is therefore better understood as trust, faithfulness, loyalty, and dedication, which is a great way to look at it. So a lot of times when people say, "Well, I have faith in God, I have faith in these different things," as they're saying in the book, people say, "Well, you're just gullible. You don't have a grasp on reality. You don't understand science. You don't understand this. You don't understand that." Right? Because unless there's something that can be empirically and scientifically proven, mathematically dragged out and shown to be true or false, then why do you believe in it? That's our enlightenment. Yes, sir.
That statement that we all hear so much, that unless it can be scientifically proven, it shouldn't be believed, is itself it's self-defeating because that can't be scientifically proven.
That's a good one. So it's that circular wisdom. But people like to say that because they like to think that they are above and beyond those kind of things in this world, with that kind of love, with that kind of faith, and that kind of hope that we have as Christians. They say, oh yeah, I don't need that stuff because I have science, I have all these other things to prove us. And it's sad because a lot of times you see those are the kind of people that are generally the shallowest, because they don't see the miracles of life. They don't see God working in everything around them. They don't see the God in the trees and all these other things. And I'm not talking about going out there and tree hugging, but I mean the point is that these are the things that God shows us, right? Because no one has seen God and lived, right? We understand that. But we do see the works of God. And in each of those things, we see something of God. Just as all of us are created by God, and we see God in each of us, right? Now again, I don't know if he's this handsome or whatever. I'm sure he's looked better than this. But I mean, the point is that in our humanity and our capability of our humanity is where we find God. And it's the same thing with the trees and everything else. There's God out there. Just as anything that's made has an imprint of the maker. And so to turn around and say, it's just somehow things kind of mix together and somehow they happen,
I often think of that in the morning prayers. I think it's the prayer of St. Basil the Great that starts out, we bless thee, O God most high and Lord of mercies, whoever worketh great and mysterious deeds for us, glorious, wonderful, and numberless. And that always gets me thinking about just creation and how awesome it is and how amazing God is, that He, like it says somewhere, upholds all of this just by the word of His power. He keeps the planets orbiting the sun and just everything in order. And that's just so, that just is amazing. It just is truly awe-inspiring.
Well, it's good too, because when we think about God, and a lot of people, maybe don't ponder this too much, but with God there is order. With God there is order. Without God there is chaos. Now we could say, well, there's a God out there and my life is still a mess. But no, it's because God is not in your life. Now, it doesn't mean that the traffic is going to flow perfectly every morning. It doesn't mean, the checks won't bounce or whatever. That's not the idea. It's not the genie God that we're talking about. We're talking about that order in our life, that peace that we know that regardless of who's in the White House, regardless of what people are saying, regardless of all the stuff that's going on, God is still on the throne and God is still in charge. And it's something that, it might be easy to say, but it's very, very difficult to feel. And the way to do that, again, as we talk about love and hope and faith and things like that, those are the kind of things that, at least for me, help keep me grounded and keep me hoping and believing and loving, is knowing that God is in charge. Regardless of what I do, regardless of how bad I mess up, regardless of how the world is on a collision course and all this other stuff, God is still in charge. And that's not going to change. Not for a while, at least. So.
We should ship you off to the universities and you can talk to
Oh
the
boy,
children.
yeah, I'll be tarred and feathered.
Come to my school, please.
Well, and that's the thing, and I think we talked about that a little bit too, because people have lost hope, right? I mean, I know we got the picture of Obama and hope and all that. No, I mean hope. I mean hope. Hope. If there was hope, it wouldn't matter who was in the White House. There would be hope. It wouldn't matter who was in Congress and all this other stuff. All that stuff is passing. All of it's passing. We live in turmoil and everything, but it's only going to last 4 years. We'll get somebody else in there to cause new turmoil. It doesn't matter. But the problem is when you've lost that hope, and that hope is lost because there's not that love. There's not that unconditional love. The love that people have is conditioned on something, right? It's not just loving each other because they are God, right? Love your neighbor, not because, as yourself, but your neighbor is yourself. That's That's the thing that a lot of things are lost. And I think that's why, I mean, it is so sad when I read about young people who have their life ahead of them, no hope, no this, no that, everything is terrible, or worse yet, suicide. I mean, that just kills me when I think about that someone, a child would, and it's so sad, and those are people who have lost hope and have lost that love.
I lived through 1 year of 7 deaths in a high school.
Oh my.
The last one was a teacher.
Oh really?
6 students in 1 year. The senior class wanted to graduate from the funeral home.
All suicide?
Wow.
Okay? And yet, with all of that, I mean, some of them, there was one from cancer, there was one from suicide,
Right.
there were accidents. I mean, they were all,
Yeah.
but they were all dealing with people that were between the ages of 15 and 17.
Right.
And at the end, I had several students who came up to me and one other teacher, if it hadn't been for you. I said, no, it wasn't me. And the other teacher too.
Mhm.
No, it wasn't me. The Lord was here.
And that's the kind of thing that people...
I don't care whether you're in a public school or a public hospital or a public whatever. You carry forth, God's in charge. There will be things happen.
Mhm.
And people will realize, oops, there is hope.
Exactly. And I believe that when we live a hopeful life, when we live a loving, hopeful life, it's reflected on those who are around us. They can't help but see that. When the whole world is panicking, when everybody else is just as, there's nothing to live for. Everything is over. There's always something to live for. Right? God would not have put you on this earth if there wasn't something for you to live for, some purpose for you to do. Now, it might not be, build great buildings or move mountains or something like that, but in your own world, in your own space, there is something that God wants you to do. And you just need to find that. Sometimes it takes, for me, it takes a whole lifetime to figure that out. Some people are lucky and find it out early.
Though, Deacon, and you don't even know it sometimes.
But that's the thing. But if you have that kind of hope and that love, then you will be driven by that, as opposed to some sort of plan that could change at any moment based on who's in the White House or terrorists, running through Berlin or something like that. All of those things are the tragedies of this world that we're always going to have. And, people say, well, it's so worse. Again, growing up, you remember the big thing was nuclear annihilation or something like that. That's been around for quite a while. People who remember wars remember
doing the drills going under your desk.
Going under your desk.
Yeah.
because you guys don't have to live through that anymore. But that was the big thing, nuclear annihilation. I think the other thing was overpopulation or starvation or something.
Yeah. Well, look and the crazy wars. With the Native Americans that we attacked and killed in huge numbers. They walked through Tasmania and killed all of the locals.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, you were reading the 1800s the other day. It sounds like, oh my God.
Oh yeah. That's always happened. And we claim to be Christians, yet we're doing things like that to our fellow human beings. It's sad.
Also, isn't that, with that faith though, you have to have the faith. And there's so much skepticism or skeptic people that don't think, it's almost like the negative. There's always the negative. They don't think, any other way that it just...
Yeah. Well, it's hard to have faith, just as it's hard to have love, when you have all these different things bombarding you. When people are telling you that certain people or certain things are unlovable, and when you lose that and you start looking around and saying, there's nothing to love. Hey, I don't even love myself. Then pretty soon, where is your hope? It's gone. You don't have that faith anymore. All that's dried up because you've lost that love. And if you see, you talk about annihilating Native people. I don't know, for whatever reason, you could say for the name of God or whatever like that, the cause of civilization. But really, if they were able to see God in each one of those people, they certainly wouldn't be killing them. And if they do, then I can tell you they're not very Christian. because we are supposed to be able to see God in everybody who we encounter.
Isn't it true more wars have been started in the cause of Christianity or religion?
No.
Depending on which continent than any of
No, I don't believe
the
that.
wars?
That's a good excuse, but I don't believe
You
that.
don't believe that?
More wars have been caused by economics. More wars have been caused by me wanting your piece of ground. More wars have been caused because I want your castle. Now, I could turn around and say, God is with me, right? And now it becomes a holy war.
Yeah.
But I mean, what I always say is follow the money. People like to say, follow the money. Why? If you turn around and did it for God, what is God getting out of this? Converts? No, they're dead. God's getting your castle. What's he going to do with it? God's getting your piece of ground. He needs that. He already has it.
Yeah.
What's God getting out of it? Not much. Okay, now, what is the victor getting out of it? He's getting your castle. He's getting your piece of ground. He's getting all your money. He's getting your people as slaves.
Which will be attacked again.
Oh, sure. And then they're going to lose that too. I mean, it's that cycle. It's that cycle. Yeah. I mean, people like to say that more wars are started by religion or by Christianity. But it's been more of an excuse,
Yes,
really,
right.
because each time when you look at that, you could say, well, if you're trying to make converts, that's not a very good way of doing it. And if you're doing it and just say, okay, I now convert you, I've killed you and converted you, now I'm going to go home, then maybe there was some religion to it there. But obviously it's not Christianity. And obviously they're not going to leave the spoils of war because, I mean, they won it because God was with them and God wanted them to have it. So, yeah, so I find that difficult. Well, I'll tell you what, I think we covered this, and I thank everybody. Is there any questions or anything? I know I've been talking a lot. Any questions about the ladder of divine ascent? So, what do we learn from the ladder of divine ascent?
We got a long way to go.
We just ain't there yet, right? I hope.
I have no shot.
I hope you have no shot. I hope that you can refer back to this. I hope that this study has not been one of disappointing. Like, a lot of times people have picked up the ladder of divine ascent, in its original, read it and said, oh, I'll never make it, I quit. That's not the idea. The idea is to continue to try to climb that ladder, to try to acquire those virtues. And certainly the best way to do it is by studying God's Word through prayer, through love, and through the sacraments of the church. Never forgetting what? What is the one thing that we should never forget?
I forgot.
Starts with a D.
A what?
What's the one thing that we should never forget?
No, you said it starts with.
Starts with a D. D. What was the one thing? The one theme that seems to weave through all of his different steps here.
Death.
Death.
That's so easy. We're thinking so.
See? Yeah.
Remembrance
Remembrance
of death.
of death. Remember that, because that is, now it's not in the morbid sense, but the remembrance of death is to remember that this might be our last time. So repentance, to live the life of the church, to live the life as we're supposed to live, and to be more Christ-like in our faith. Thank you, everybody.
You did a great
Yeah, you
job. I
did
look
a great
forward to your
job.
next class.
Thank God. So,
When did we start this? It was in July.
we start,
No, it was
No, no,
it was like
it was over Lent, yeah.
Lent,
We-
yeah.
Oh my gosh, it was March? Or...
yeah.
But we took the summer off.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't. I was still trying to climb the ladder.
Oh, yeah.
You might have taken the ladder.
All right, let's go ahead and pray. It is truly me to bless you with Theosis, for blessed and most pure in the love of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without defilement to be word to God the Word, through Theosis to magnify you, in the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.